It is the honor of a lifetime for me, on behalf of National Review Institute, to present the 2020 William F. Buckley Jr. Prize for Leadership in Political Thought to the sainted junior senator from New York, Judge James L. Buckley.
Thank you all. It's great to be with you, if only electronically. I'm honored to receive this award because it certifies that I have proven a faithful custodian of my remarkable brother Bill's legacy. What a shame it is that Bill isn't here to help us thread our way to the strange world today and to explain the craziness which allows us to dismiss arson and looting as constitutionally sanctioned speech. But even if we move past the current headline-grabbing distractions, we remain confronted with some serious ongoing threats to constitutional government that I believe far too few Americans are aware of. So please forgive me if I focus on some truly serious concerns on what ought to be a cheerful, upbeat evening. Let me begin with our nation's beginning. The architects of the American Republic had no illusions about human nature, which is the one constant in human affairs. From their study of the history of the free societies reaching all the way back to ancient Greece, they understood that the drive to accumulate power, whether by a despot or individual or parliamentary majorities, is the big historic enemy of individual freedom. They therefore incorporated two safeguards into our Constitution: its system of separation of powers with its checks on potential abuses, and the principle of federalism as underscored by the 10th Amendment's command that all powers not assigned to the federal government be reserved to the people or the states. During our first 180-odd years, Washington largely observed those limits. But with the advent of Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, Congress began a wholesale assumption of the state's responsibilities. As I explain in my book, Saving Congress from Itself, it has done so through a proliferation of federal programs that offer states and their subdivisions grants of money for purposes that are the state's exclusive responsibility. These grants come with the most detailed instructions on how the money is to be used. Out of deference for the 10th Amendment, the Supreme Court has stipulated that Congress may not coerce the states into accepting them. 50 years of experience, however, has demonstrated that states find it enormously difficult to decline what it is viewed as free money from Washington, however onerous the attached conditions. Thus, the practical effect of the court's decisions has been to empower Congress to bribe the states into accepting Washington's directives on matters that remain the state's exclusive responsibility. Members of Congress have become addicted to these programs because they deal with matters that are of the most intimate concern to their constituents, matters such as housing, schooling, job training, potholes, you name it. Therefore, their creation and the securing of grants offer members the easiest way to rub elbows with voters and generate the favorable headlines that will assure their reelection. As a consequence, whereas those programs distributed $24 billion in 1970 when I was elected to the Congress, by 2015, that figure had grown to almost $641 billion, or 1/6 of total federal spending and that year and all for matters that are none of Washington's business. The result has been an avalanche of regulation-ridden programs that now provide federal subsidies for virtually every activity in which the states are engaged. They have thus converted the states in too many ways into mere administrators of programs created in Washington and overseen by bureaucrats who are the farthest removed from where the money is to be used. In short, those programs have effectively nullified the 10th Amendment. But that isn't the only way that Congress has been undermining the Constitution's safeguards. Over the years, it has also been chipping away at its separation of powers. The Constitution provides that, quote, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. Thus, Congress is the sole legitimate source of federal laws. Responsible law writing, however, can be a difficult art, and the more complex the legislative details, the greater care is required to ensure that the finished product does nothing more nor less than what Congress intended. As I say, this is demanding work. So Congress has fallen into the habit of delegating ever more essentially legislative details to executive agencies that in turn produce the detailed regulations that give congressionally enacted laws their effect. In doing so, the agencies tend to resolve statutory ambiguities in ways that will meet their own objectives, which is more, may or may not coincide with what Congress had in mind. Over time, the effect of all of this has been the creation of an extra-constitutional administrative state that both writes and administers the rules that now govern ever wider areas of American life. Procedures are in place that are intended to subject regulations to scrutiny before they can take effect. But the administrative state can sidestep them by simply writing letters, as it did recently when it advised schools that boys must be allowed to use girls' bathrooms so long as the boys thought of themselves as girls. And the administrative state gets away with such excesses because they have become so common in current practice that Congress too rarely raises any objections. So here we are today. Federalism is just a memory, and Congress's abdication of its own responsibilities have given us an expanding administrative state whose non-elected officials govern by regulatory fiat. As I noted in my book, an effective federalism is easily restored. All that is required is for Congress to strip the grants of federal directives telling the states how the money is to be used. This simple reform would once again allow accountable state and local officials rather than distant bureaucrats to determine how best to meet state and local problems. Unfortunately, Congress has thus far failed to follow my advice. Restoring the Constitution's allocation of governmental powers, however, will be a lot more difficult task. Over the past generation and more, our educators have abdicated their responsibility to ground their students into the fundamentals of the American experience. As a result, far too many of our people now suffer from a peculiar form of historical amnesia. They remember all our past sins, such as slavery and our treatment of the Indians, but far too few have a sufficient awareness of the constitutional and economic principles that, on the historical record, had made ours the most productive, prosperous, innovative, generous, and free society the world had known. Principles that were responsible for the freedoms and material well-being they take so much for granted. I have had to use the past tense, however, because our nation is no longer the world's freest. As a consequence, we have become a nation of constitutional illiterates. Few Americans have any understanding of the degree to which the Constitution's safeguards are being whittled away. So we need to remind them of their existence and hammer home the urgent need to bring the administrative state under effective constitutional control. That will be anything but easy, but it must be done. The challenge to preserve our republic has always been with us, but I suggest we are now facing an unprecedented threat. As Benjamin Franklin reminded us in the close of the Constitutional Convention, while the framers have given us a republic, it is up to us to keep it. I can think of no organization that is better able to assume that challenge today than the National Review Institute. So I urge you to focus all your considerable resources on reminding Americans of the constitutional sources of their blessings and of the utter seriousness of the present threat. You have your marching orders. God bless you all.